Thanks for tuning in to Ag PhD. I'm Brian Hefty.
And I'm Darren Hefty. Thanks for joining us. On our farm, one of our big goals long-term for our soils is we want to grow the organic matter in our soils. We want to build that number up for a number of reasons. We'll talk about how to do it today.
We also want to discuss compaction. This is an important thing for any farmer. You're never going to eliminate compaction, but if you can reduce the amount of compaction in your fields, you've got a better chance for root growth and higher yield. So we'll talk about that today.
Our Weed of the Week is really fun for me because I can already see you trying to identify it, and I'm going to bet there's about a 99% chance you've misidentified our Weed of the Week. We'll show you what it is and how to stop it later in the show. But first, here's our Farm Basics.
Farm Basics is brought to you by the Liberty Link trait and Liberty herbicide from Bayer. The most reliable weed management solution, Liberty Link and Liberty herbicide are the link to efficient row crop production and sustainable weed management.
During our Farm Basics time today, we want to talk a little about spreading residue behind the combine. Now, if you're a non-farmer, you say, all right, you're going through with this combine and there's just residue that's coming out the back end. It's really no big deal. But for us as farmers, this is incredibly important. If that residue isn't spread properly, we've got a major problem next year.
All right, if you started with a black, clean-tilled field and everything is even, well, you think about it, seed depth, no problem. You're going to get it at the same depth all the way through the field. And then for crop emergence, all the seed has to do is push up through an inch or two of soil. No big deal. Everything's fine. But when you've got residue spread unevenly throughout the field, some seeds have no residue to push through and they pop right out of the ground. Others may have a couple of inches or more of residue to push through, and it may just take more time for that soil to warm up and seed to pop through.
Well, I think Darren mentioned a key thing that I wanted to talk about, and that's how warm or cold that soil is. The more residue there is on top of that ground, quite often we're looking at many more days to reach the ideal temperature in that soil in the spring. So if there's ground that got almost no residue when that combine was going through and it spread the residue unevenly, and there are spots where there's almost no residue there, that soil is going to warm up faster in the spring. Where all the residue is, it's going to warm up a lot slower. So what that means is you're going to have different levels of emergence in the spring, and that can be a real problem for yield.
Well, on our farm, when we started planting corn this year, it was 7 degrees difference where we had deep residue versus where it was black. So like in a strip till situation where it's black for a strip and then residue to the side, this would be a very similar situation to what many farmers are facing in just whole fields where residue is spread unevenly. If there's a big windrow right behind the combine and then there's nothing once you get out a little bit further, 7 degrees difference in temperature. Well, that's a huge, huge thing in the spring because most farmers are looking at, wow, I'm targeting 50-degree soil temp and 43 degrees versus 50, big difference.
Even if the farmer is going to do tillage afterwards, which does spread the residue out certainly, he's going to have a difficult time getting through big piles of residue, and in other areas of the field, the ground's going to be really black because there was no residue. So as a farmer, it's important to spread the residue out evenly. As a non-farmer, when you're driving past the fields this fall, you can just kind of look out through the field as the farmer is going along with his combine and see if that residue is spread evenly or not. If it's not, you know that, hey, that farmer is going to be wishing later on at some point he would have spread that residue evenly across the field.
One other thing you'll see at varying densities across the field is weed pressure. If you have our Weed of the Week, you need to get it stopped. We'll show you how to do that coming up later in the show.
As weed resistance becomes more of a problem across the country, your crop protection program needs to stay flexible to be effective. Hypro Innovative Spray Technology's wide selection of spray tips and nozzle configurations are available to keep your crop protection program right on technology, right on target.
Are you looking for an easy way to apply dry powdered products to your stored grain? Do you want to use the applicator recommended by industry leaders for products like Diacon D and other dry powder products? Changing Time CT applicators successfully apply a diversity of products quickly, easily, and accurately. The innovative CT applicators are designed to give you the most accurate application of products such as talc, inoculants, fertilizers, and other dry products. For commercial use or on the farm, you need the applicator industry leaders are using. CT applicators for the changing times.
There are no marks of conflict lining this landscape, no echoes of economic hardship, just the unmistakable murmur of Mother Nature's hand. In the perennial quest to outperform, ensure your crop gets the nutrients it craves with a Veil Phosphorus Fertilizer Enhancer. Nothing helps protect your investment more, so you can grow confidently no matter what comes your way. Avail. Hold your ground.
There are trillions of hardworking microbes right beneath your feet. Today, Monsanto BioAg is harnessing the power of microbes, creating microscopic farmhands that help plants access nutrients, enhance root and shoot growth, and handle stressful conditions throughout the season, protecting and maximizing your yield potential. We're turning 500 trillion microbes into 500 trillion new farmhands, ready for work. Nature, it's powerful technology.
My soybeans are 100% Liberty Link. I started the Liberty Link approximately 6 years ago, going with the glyphosate system before that, and just noticing that I wasn't getting the control that I really wanted. Started in with the Liberty Link system, and it's been very satisfactory. Well, the velvet leaf is probably my most hated weed. I'll walk across a field 40 rods to pull a velvet leaf if I know it's there. And when I did spray, there were a lot of velvet leaf out here, and I have not found any. And I use a pre on the beans, and we can just come back and clean it up with our Liberty, and it does a good job. If you ever break out of weeds, you know, you may be losing 20 to 30% as far as your production goes. Well, looking out across my bean field, I'm seeing that, you know, the weed control's been good.
The Liberty Link system, a simply better solution, now backed by the Liberty Weed Control Guarantee, because Liberty is simply better weed control by Bayer.
When it comes to organic matter in the soil, it is incredibly important. We want to talk about the reasons why today, as well as how you can build organic matter in your soil going into next year.
Building organic matter definitely doesn't happen overnight. It's not like from one year to the next you're going to go from 2% organic matter to 5 in your soil, but it is something to target over the long term. So the first step towards building that organic matter is going to be reducing the amount of tillage that you're doing. As we go into harvest season this fall, doing less tillage out there is going to be important. We just talked about spreading the residue evenly. One reason that more tillage gets done, or extra passes of tillage, is when residue is not spread right. So if you get the residue spread evenly, you've got a much better chance of doing less tillage or no tillage on your farm.
All right, reducing tillage is by far and away number one when it comes to building organic matter. Number two on the list would be planting crops with lots of roots. So we're talking about corn here instead of soybeans. On average, corn plants are going to have roughly 5 times the overall root mass of soybean plants. So if we have that many more roots in the ground, that's huge. And the reason why is because a lot of people think that organic matter is built from above ground residue, and that is not true. Yes, there could be a little bit of organic matter that comes from the above ground residue, but most of that above ground residue is to protect the soil from erosion. Where most organic matter is actually built is when roots decay down below the ground. So if you can leave the root mass intact by reducing tillage, and you have more roots to begin with by planting crops that have lots of them, like corn for example, then you're well on the path toward having more organic matter long term in your soil.
Using manure or compost is a great way to fertilize your fields, but also to help increase organic matter over time. There is organic material there, obviously, and the more that we can apply out to our fields gives us a better chance of growing that organic matter down in our soils throughout the years.
The other couple steps would be use cover crops and use biological products. So altogether, we've really got 5 steps here. It's reduce the tillage, it's plant crops with lots of roots, use manure or compost, plant cover crops, and then use some biological products. So if you do those 5 things over a long period of time, you're going to see your organic matter levels just continue to rise. And why is this important? Why do we really care? Well, one of the big things is just the overall health of your soil. When you walk out onto your ground, does it feel hard as a rock, or is it kind of spongy? When the soil's spongy, you just have better chance for soil life, you have more room for roots to grow, more air or oxygen is getting down into the soil just to help your overall soil health and tilth. This is incredibly important.
Well, you can't really measure that very well. Now, there are some measurements out there looking at soil health, but over the years, more guys have tried to measure the amount of nutrients in the soil or the amount of water in the soil. What we see with organic matter, for each 1% of organic matter that you can build in your soil, you can hold 4% more water. So if you can increase your organic matter by 3% over the years, well, you can increase your water holding capacity by 12%. That's huge on many farms across the country. That's going to be the difference between being wildly successful and just having a good crop. When we look at the nutrients, clay in the soil is thought to hold all these nutrients. And so many farmers think, well, I've got clay, so I can hold plenty of nutrients out there. Organic matter can hold more nutrients than the clay can, and also it can hold some of the nutrients that are negatively charged. With soil particles, they are negatively charged, and to hold negatively charged nutrients, it's hard. It's like a magnet. They repel each other. But organic matter is that piece in your soil that can hold those nutrients in place.
Building organic matter in your soil is important. We want your soil to be as healthy as possible, and you want that too if you're going to have higher yields in the future. So you can again follow our steps today that we talked about toward that organic matter, building it up. It's going to be so tremendously beneficial for you, both in the short term and in the long term.
We've identified some key steps here to building organic matter, but can you identify our weed of the week? We'll talk about it later in the show.
Oh, Ed, what are we presenting?
That Creden's soybeans are designed using smart genetics.
Look, state-of-the-art breeding advances the best germplasm.
Plus, tailored varieties for any field conditions with choice in herbicide-tolerant traits.
And Creden's soybeans come backed by Bayer's ongoing innovation.
Want increased yields and ROI? Plant the smarter soybean.
Talk to an authorized Creden's retailer or discover the right Creden's variety at credens.bayer.us.
Always read and follow label instructions.
With the success of the Case IH Tiger Quad Track and Magnum Road Track tractors, it's no secret why Case IH is the leader of the track. So it wasn't surprising when the competition started imitating us. But only Case IH offers a 5-axle design to give you a smoother ride, more power to the ground, with less berming and compaction. Still, we're flattered. In fact, if we weren't already red, we'd be blushing.
I would recommend Morton for many reasons, but one is that they have a long history of standing behind their buildings.
Our sales experience with Morton was a nice experience. You know, they told us what it was going to cost, what it was going to be, you know, how it was going to run, and it worked out really well for us.
Morton has built me one heck of a nice building, and it should stand for a very, very long time. I was very happy with the workmanship.
Check us out online at mortonbuildings.com.
We have a school and a church nearby. I actually go to the classroom to educate the students about what's going on here on my farm. The system that I have, I tie everything together. No-till, cover crops. We applied AgriLiquid in furrow with our soybeans this year. It seemed like they jumped out of the soil, even though we had the record rainfall. I really feel that I'm feeding my plant on a consistent year-round basis throughout the growing season.
Compaction created during planting leaves thousands of dollars of potential yield in your fields. Copperhead Ag has developed the Furrow Cruiser spiked closing wheel to close the seed trench more effectively. With a unique combination of closing power and control, the Furrow Cruiser provides earlier, more even emergence and higher stand counts, returning yield potential and putting profit back in your pocket. For more information on why you should never run a traditional closing system again, visit copperheadag.com.
There are trillions of hardworking microbes right beneath your feet. Today, Monsanto BioAg is harnessing the power of microbes, creating microscopic farmhands that help plants access nutrients, enhance root and shoot growth, and handle stressful conditions throughout the season, protecting and maximizing your yield potential. We're turning 500 trillion microbes into 500 trillion new farmhands, ready for work. Nature, it's powerful technology.
One of the things that you need to manage on your farm is compaction. If you can reduce overall compaction, usually that means more root growth, which means you're going to have better yields. But where does it start? I mean, how are you going to know if you even have a compaction problem out there?
Well, first of all, measuring compaction. There are a lot of different ways to do it. Okay, first of all, you could spend some money. You could buy a penetrometer. It's basically a probe, a soil probe that has a gauge on it that shows how much pressure that it takes to push down through that soil. And as you see that pressure get higher, all of a sudden you aren't going to have roots that are going to be able to penetrate through that soil. That's one way to measure compaction. Another way to measure compaction is simply to dig a post hole. If you dig a post hole, you can dig it as deep as you want to. I would suggest digging as far as your arm can reach down into the hole. Then you take a knife, you need a blade that's at least 3 or 4 inches long, and then stick that knife blade into the side of that hole and start pulling it up through the soil. Once you meet a point of resistance, that's where you've got a compaction layer. You'll probably meet a couple of layers on your way up, and it may be more depending on if there have been some issues out in that field, like maybe you've been digging your wheels in deep in some muddy conditions. Finally, there's the root pit. If you want to see really what's going on below the ground, a great way to do it is with a root pit. You dig on our farm oftentimes 4 feet deep, and maybe the width of a skid loader bucket is what we'll do a lot of times. If you have a backhoe, you could use that as well. Same thing here. Then just run that knife up the side of that root pit and see what you have for compaction.
Now, Darren, you didn't even mention your favorite way to check for compaction, and that's just simply carry a spade out into the field all the time. Darren likes to do this and just poke around with that spade. You could certainly take a rod, anything. The big thing is you've got to get out in your field and look around a little bit. Walk through the field. A lot of times, just even literally walking in the field without sticking anything in the ground, I can tell, oh, hey, this ground is really hard, or, oh, this ground does feel kind of soft. But in addition to that, we're not just talking about the top 2 inches, 4 inches, anything like that. We like to get those roots growing down 2, 3, 4 feet in the ground. And every crop out there can send some roots down 2, 3, 4 feet in the ground. So obviously you have to have good drainage, because if the water table's way high, they're not going to go deep. But the other thing is this whole compaction deal. And as soon as I mention drainage and we start thinking about water, compaction is going to vary dramatically. Let's say you got an inch of rain yesterday. Well, all of a sudden you can push that rod through anything, right? But if you're in a drier area of the country like us, we get rain once or twice a month. So quite often our soil's really dry, and we have a lot of compaction layers that the roots simply can't penetrate through. So this is incredibly important to check. Once you've found out and figured out, hey, I've got a little compaction issue, now you've got to manage it. There are a lot of different ways to go about this. I mean, one of the first things you've got to do is look at your soil test, because quite often we can tell you, hey, if you've got tremendously high magnesium and low calcium, simply by getting some gypsum or lime or some other source of calcium out there, you'll get more porosity in your soil and you'll reduce your overall compaction issue. But if you've got a solid hard pan in one spot of the field, it's going to take more than that.
All right, so the first thing that comes to mind for most folks is tillage. Well, what kind of tillage should I do to break up that compaction layer? Well, it depends on how deep the compaction is. Let's say, for example, that you have a plow pan at 6 inches, where you've always done tillage, it's always been about 6 inches, and wow, you get 6 inches of fluffy soil, and then at the bottom of that, you just got a rock. So what do? Well, in that case, you may use some sort of conventional tillage that goes slightly deeper. Maybe your tillage goes 7 inches, you get just below that compacted soil, flip it all up, and guess what? You've got fluffy soil now, maybe down at least a foot. That's a short-term fix. The problem with that is, as you're doing tillage at 7 inches, the next year you do it at 7 inches, pretty soon you've just moved your hard pan down and now it's at 7 inches. So what I would recommend is varying the depth of tillage if you're in a conventional tillage system. That way you can avoid those things, or at least make it longer before you have a big problem.
All right, whether you're in a conventional tillage system or not, what we do encourage you to do is consider taking out the top compaction layer and the bottom one too. A lot of times we'll find compaction layers down at 14, 18, 20 inches deep. So on our farm, occasionally, we're running a machine we call a zone builder. It's basically a deep ripper with a narrow point and a straight shank. So we're not trying to roll the soil. We're simply trying to make some slices in that soil, kind of lift it, set it back down. And by doing this, we haven't completely removed the base, so in between where we've done this tillage at 30 inches, then we at least can go out there in a wet condition, or a wet fall, wet spring, something like that. We've got some kind of base. We're not just sinking down to nowhere. But by having those slices in the ground, and we've been able to show this in root pits, roots are always going to take the path of least resistance. So even if it's 10 inches, 15 inches away from where they're growing, they will start migrating to where that slot is, and then that will allow you to get more roots down deeper in the ground. So that's one very important thing you can do with tillage. Earlier in the show, we were talking about organic matter. If we have better overall organic matter in the soil, we're less likely to have compaction. We're more likely to have roots just continuing to grow down. But I look at this quite often, guys say, well, I'm going to go to no-till or reduced till. Okay, that's great, but let's fix the problem first. You've got a hard pan, maybe a couple hard pans in the soil. You're going to have to slice through those in order to make anything happen. Yes, cover crops can help. That might be able to solve the problem for you, but in a lot of cases, hey, we know this tillage solution absolutely does work. Again, narrow points, straight shanks.
All right, and two other things to talk about, just avoidance. If it's wet, stay out of the fields. Don't create the compaction to start with. That's easier said than done. We don't farm in an ideal world, and sometimes, you know what, we just have to get the crop out because it's going to start snowing next week and we'll never get it. I understand that. The other thing is frost. In the northern part of the United States, in climates where that frost is going to go deep down into the soil, farmers are believing that, you know what, frost is just going to cure up my compaction. Well, when you can still see tracks from where the wagon trains went through in the 1800s, and it hasn't broken down in northern Minnesota, in North Dakota, well, it's not going to happen. If it hasn't happened over 100 years, the problem that you created out in your field over the last 10 or 20 is not going to go away. So yes, frost can help a little bit, but it's not going to help a whole lot. You do need to solve that problem.
The other big thing that we haven't mentioned is what you're doing with your tires or tracks. So we've done a lot of work with Michelin, for example, and talking about tire pressures, getting the right tire, maybe switching to tracks. You got to look at all these things. The big thing is we just want you to address compaction as much as you can on your farm, because as you do that and as you reduce the amount of compaction in your field, you're going to have better yields. Another thing that's going to lead to better yields, of course, is controlling our weed of the week. We'll tell you how to do it next. Our weed of the week is Bristly Foxtail.
You may have misidentified it as green foxtail, and yes, it does look pretty close. The good thing is the same herbicides will control both
And we
weeds.
have lots of herbicides to control this weed too. When we talk pre-emerge herbicides, that's where we really want to start. Get a good pre-program in any crop and you're much better off. In corn, I'd suggest Harness, Surpass, Outlook Dual. In soybeans, one of the yellows, Treflan, or Prowl. In wheat, Prepare or one of the other grass killers ought to do it.
Post-emerge Roundup and Liberty work great in crops where those are labeled. And also in corn, you've got Accent as an option for very small bristly foxtail. In soybeans, there's lots of grass and volunteer corn killers that
Like
will be
Select
highly
Max.
effective. And in wheat, you could use something like Axial.
Well, once again, our weed of the week is Bristly Foxtail. It's not that much different than the other foxtails. Just make sure you're controlling it for top yields on your farm. Well, that's it for our weed of the week, but stay tuned. Iron Talk is coming up next.
We had super dry conditions there at the end of the fall, probably some driest corn we've harvested. Head shell was almost nil, very minimal. We were down to a kernel or less per square foot with this head, and normally we thought we were doing good keeping down to that 3 kernels per square feet with our previous head. Whether the corn's worth $3, $6, or $8 a bushel, definitely puts more money in our pocket at the end of the day.
I trust Agro Liquid because I've seen the results and they're positive and they work on my farm, they work in my environment. When I started farming, we was farming around 125 acres and now we're up to around 1,700 acres. I think I was recognized as the Tennessee Young Farmer by being a leader in the community and also being innovative. I'm always looking for new products, but I got to make sure that those products are sustainable. I've got a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old and I would love for them to farm this land.
Ever wonder if you are over drying or spoiling your grain when you turn on the fans? Do you worry about the condition of your grain all winter long? Are you able to see what is happening in your bins? AgroDry will give you peace of mind with our 24-hour monitoring system. View real-time grain bin data online from a web-enabled device. AD-Link will send you alerts when sensors are triggered by potential grain problems. Stop worrying and start storing quality grain with AgroDry. Visit agrodryllc.com today.
farmer's attention to detail is what makes the difference. You take the time for service management because you know how vital it is to your operation. You service your field like everything else because soil sampling makes all the difference and gets the results you want. Download the app Soil Test Pro and start grid sampling today. Keep your farm growing strong. The more you test, the more you know.
Introducing the SoilMax ZD48, the newest addition to the SoilMax Gold Digger lineup. The first plow designed for smaller class tractors, the ZD48 has been tested on tractors weighing between 10,000 and 16,000 pounds with excellent results. Designed for row crop farms, vineyards, irrigation, and specialty crop farms. The SoilMax ZD48 will install tile up to 48 inches deep as well as install 3 or 4-inch tile. The ZD48 truly opens up the world of tile installation to more farms than ever before.
I would recommend Morton for many reasons, but one is that they have a long history of standing behind their buildings.
Our sales experience with Morton was a nice experience. You know, they told us what it was going to cost, what it was going to be, you know, how it was going to run, and it worked out really well for us.
Morton has built me one heck of a nice building, and it should stand for a very, very long time. I was very happy with the workmanship.
Check us out online at mortonbuildings.com.
With new seed traits and chemistries entering the market, your crop protection equipment needs precision and adaptability. Hi-Pro Innovative Spray Technologies has the products to give your applications greater accuracy, less drift, and more coverage. Hi-Pro, right on technology, right on target.
Iron Talk is brought to you by Case IH.
The AFS Connect Farm Management System from Case IH connects you, and only you, to the information you need most from your equipment, from anywhere, at any time. AFS Connect, only from Case IH.
I recently got a question on the Ag PhD radio show from a farmer in North Carolina who wanted to know the best way to apply a small amount of certain micronutrients. I'll explain in today's Iron Talk. The good thing and the bad thing with micronutrients is you don't need much of them in order to have a successful crop. You don't need a whole lot of pounds, which is good from the cost side. However, you don't need many pounds. So how do you apply them evenly and accurately? First, how you don't apply them is in a blend with your dry NP and K fertilizer in one big spreader. When I was first out of college, I met a farmer who was asking me about boron and alfalfa. I knew it was critical for him to have boron. I had no idea what had already happened, though. He had purchased dry fertilizer from a nearby fertilizer dealer and then had them pull a dry spreader out to his farm 10 miles away from their fertilizer plant. He had MAP and he had potash, and they were blended, and he asked the dealer to throw in some boron as well. The problem with that is the density of each of the three products was different, so as the spreader bounced down the road, all the boron settled out to the bottom. When they'd begun spreading the fertilizer, all the boron for the whole field came out in the first 100 yards, killing his crop. He scraped up the top couple inches of soil in that area and spread it out over the whole field, and his problems went away. The lesson is simple. To spread something like boron or any of these micronutrients that only involves a few pounds for a whole field, it's much better to do it in a liquid form or as a dry only when it's all by itself. That way you can be certain that you got it just right. That's all for today's Iron Talk, and now back to the show.
Closed captioning for Ag PhD is sponsored by Norwood Sales.
On your farm, you need speed and year-round effectiveness in your tillage program. The Quick Till from Norwood Sales allows you to move quickly through your fields, maximizing time and improving yield. Constructed of heavy-duty materials, the Quick Till is ideal for both spring and fall applications, from preparing a healthy seedbed early in the season to breaking up corn residue after harvest. For more information about how a Quick Till can improve fields on your farm, call Norwood Sales today.
That's our time for today, but before we go, we want to invite you to tune into the Ag PhD radio show at 2 p.m. Central each weekday on SiriusXM Channel 147, where we take your live phone calls.
Don't miss the next Ag PhD TV show. We'll have another Weed of the Week, Farm Basics, Iron Talk, and a whole lot more. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for watching Ag PhD.
While the population of our planet grows each year, the amount of farmland we have to grow food for everyone becomes less. According to the USDA, farmers will need to produce as much food in the next 40 years as they have in the last 500. To learn how they are doing it sustainably, visit the Responsible Nutrient Management Foundation at rnmf.org.